why I wanted to do this exercise was to give you some nuggets of ideas when you're called upon to do a devotion, things that you can use with groups of people. And this is something that you absolutely could use with a president's cabinet or with a group of your colleagues. I have done a variation of this with students where I ask them to bring a faith show and tell, an item that helps remind them of faith or ground their faith. And so you each have an item that's a vocation show and tell. So something that grounds your why, something that reminds you of what you are called to. And that's not just your work, right? We've talked about how we have all of these different vocations. So we're going to move here in just a second into some smaller groups. And what I'd like you to do in your group is just go around and tell the story of your item, what it is, and how it is that it connects you with your vocation. Again, whether that vocation is your work or your or a relationship that's significant to you or something that you're involved in the community, whatever that vocation is, how that tangible item reminds you of your calling. So I think it looks like, and Jessica, help me out. If folks come in the middle of our time, will they just be put in those groups, or how will that work?
I'll sort them into the groups as soon as they come in.
Great. So you may have some others joining your group as we have some stragglers, and that's just fine. Just bring them into what we're doing, and then we'll come back together at the end and have a little wrap up. Let's take, Jessica, can we take 12 minutes in our groups? That'll give everybody a couple minutes to share their show and tell.
Sure.
And then Jessica will bring us back together. Okay, here we go.
Hey there, Mark Blackburn.
Hey, Tom. Sorry I came in a little late. I was fixing an issue here.
Well, that's life and where we're at in the world, right? They're just issues, any way you look at it.
Yeah.
And it looks like, I'm just checking something on the groups here, but a couple of the folks that are supposed to be in our group are not here yet. So, oh, wait a minute. Brian, maybe? No. I got it.
Join.
Yeah, you're good. So did you bring something?
I did. It says inviting me to join.
Yeah, you can just jump into the room if you want. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And
So
it's just you and Richard. It's just you, Richard, and Tiffany in room 3.
Okay, so okay, wait a minute. Let me just go. Yep, got it.
And
see ya.
All right.
Am I in the wrong spot, Jessica?
No, it doesn't look like you were given a room yet. So
Hey, I'm right with you, David.
Oh, they've broken.
to-
They're doing breakouts.
3.
Okay, got it. Thank
right.
you.
I got
no
kicked
problem.
out and had to come back in. That's why I'm probably been unassigned.
Thank you.
So, all right.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, we're coming back together. I hope that was fun and meaningful for you. I know that in my group, there were some really creative things shared, and I got to know the folks in my group a little bit better just through the stories of their items. So one of the reasons that I do this, when I do an activity, this activity or something like it, for me as a pastor, I think a lot about sacrament. And in the Lutheran Church, there are two sacraments, baptism and Holy Communion. And these are tangible things that God has given us to serve as reminders of who we are as God's people and how it is that we are called in the world. This is a little bit of an aside, but I'll say it because I find it helpful. Maybe you will too. That worship really is just practice for how we live the rest of our lives. And so week after week, we come to worship to be reminded. And we receive those reminders through things that we can taste and hear and see, things like music, prayer, the waters of baptism, the elements of Holy Communion. And so God has given us these tangible things to remind us. And each of the things that you shared, again, whether it was a tattoo or a song or a bracelet that you're wearing, these are things that we can touch and see and hear, maybe taste, and we know more who it is that we are and who we are called to be. So again, this is an activity that you can use with people in your circles. I was telling my small group that sometimes when I don't have opportunity to prep people, I'll just say, what do you have on your person that is significant to you and tells a story? And we have all these things. It might be a wedding ring or another piece of jewelry. It might be a tattoo. It might be the favorite pair of shoes that you're wearing. Maybe it's a picture in your wallet. We have all these things that tell stories, and we don't even think about them because they're just so second nature, but often they are sacramental pieces of our life, things that remind us of who we are made to be. Let's pray. God, we are so grateful in this season of Christmas that you are an incarnate God that takes on flesh, that comes to earth to show us tangible things that reveal your love and your grace. I thank you for all the things that these fellows have shared, things that they can taste and feel and see and hear that remind them of you and remind them of who they are. Help each of the people on this call to live out their calling faithfully. There are many callings, to live those out authentically, and give us each grace in every step. Bless our time now today. Bless our learning and our conversation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Ann, and thank you all for the sharing that went on. And our group was terrific, and I trust the others were as well. We're going to take 5 minutes, fresh cup of coffee, time to stretch, and we'll be back. And Mary Ann and I are going to lead the next hour's conversation. We're going to talk about money and philanthropy and development and advancement, everybody's favorite subject. And we're so excited. See you in 5.
Thank you, Ann. That was great.
Yeah, it's kind of fun, huh?
Yeah, really fun, really a great devotion.
We have all these things that we see every day, but nobody else sees, and we get a chance to tell the story.
And this is the perfect lead into this integrated leader model.
Right.
Because that's really what we ask people to do, is be very thoughtful about. So, it was perfect.
Good.
Thank you.
I got to call Kyle quick. He called me, so I just want to make sure everything's okay.
Yeah, I'll talk to you later.
So Mary Ann, were you successful 2 days in a row?
With what?
Just FYI, it's still recording.
Nels off to school?
Yes, yes, we were successful. We were successful. I told Don that earlier this morning. Thanks, David, for letting us know it's recording. We know, and Jessica edits this stuff out. So,
Gotcha. Just wanted to make sure.
yeah, how are you feeling this morning?
Better now that I'm awake. The drainage kept me awake all night, so
Oh,
I'm a little defocused. You'll know why.
yeah, well, take care of yourself.
Well, I
And-
have. Thank you.
Is there a lot of COVID in California?
I honestly haven't looked,
You
but
haven't?
we went to the Midwest for Christmas.
Oh,
To
well,
Missouri, right? So, but
Yeah. welcome. Yeah.
yeah, fairly careful.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it feels like my normal cold. Two kids had it. So I suspect it's not COVID, but I'm getting tested.
Yeah, good. Good. That's kind of the way of the world right now.
It is. It is. All right. I'll see you in 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay. We were Diana with they had, outdoor, right? So I've got to have them all loaded up, Oh, and everything okay?
Yeah, we're good. We are new aunt and uncle again this morning.
Oh, congratulations.
So Kyle's brother and his wife had a baby
Oh,
girl this morning.
that's fun.
Yeah, it is fun.
That's fun. Oh, that's
Lauren Naomi. Is her name.
Lauren, what a beautiful name. That's very fun.
Yeah.
Very fun. No, I kind of I was reminded of what is that? The Christmas Story with the guy in the snowsuit this morning. Now it's like they kind of push him into the car.
Is it snowing there?
No, but we're getting a storm
Yeah.
later today, but it was an outside day, all outside today, so he was ready to go. He and his snow-eating pals were already
Don't you love it how they waddle when you get them off?
and they run. It's just it's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good. Good way to start the day. And great energy.
Oh,
Energy
yeah.
generator, right?
Well,
Here.
Morning, Lauren.
Hey, Lauren.
Good morning. Hi, everybody.
good morning.
Sorry that I missed the devotion this morning. I'll post my object in the chat.
Oh, that'd be great. That would
Yeah.
be good. You would do
Yeah.
that. That's wonderful.
And look what I have at my desk. Can you see? I framed your poem, the For a
Oh.
Leader poem.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Lauren, you're sweet. You're so sweet.
Here with a new value.
Awesome.
That is great, Lauren. That's
Lauren, I was just
Positioning yourself well for success.
yeah.
Helps. I'm trying.
Lauren, I was just telling these guys that I am an aunt for the second time this morning, and my new niece, her name is Lauren.
Oh,
wonderful.
Congratulations.
Yeah, she was born
special.
this morning, so
Oh, that's really exciting.
yeah, it is exciting.
Is it a she, LAU, or?
It's a she, Lauren. Yes.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. Yeah. Well, my mail is filled with Ms. Lauren. Yeah, it's a freak. The
That's funny.
distinction between LO and LAU
Mhm.
is not widely known in the world. So it's frequently a subject of confusion. It's particularly embarrassing to handle when potential candidates for jobs write to me and assume that Lauren is female. And then when we get on the phone, they're all embarrassed, or Zoom even better. Yeah.
That's why the pronoun project works for everyone.
Yes,
Yeah,
that is
that's
true.
true. Yeah, that's
That
true.
is true.
Yeah, that's really a good point.
Yeah,
Really a
good
good point.
point.
Yep. Yep. Well, it's 10 o'clock, so it's time to talk about money. And Marianne and I are enjoy this conversation, and we hope you find it helpful. I think we neither one of us were born thinking we were going to grow up to spend our lives involved in philanthropy and development work. And I think we can say that's true for almost 100% of the people who do this work. It is not something that we think about dreaming up as a child, or growing up as a child, that we dream about and think about how we're going to be philanthropists, or that we're going to seek to encourage philanthropy or do development work. My own story is that I started out as a faculty member, and my first administrative job was institutional research, and then assistant to the president. And people would ask me how I liked administrative work, and I always said, well, I'm kind of enjoying it. I think I might continue doing it. The one thing I do know is I'll never go do development work. And 3 years later, I was vice president for development. Life has a funny way of surprising us. And what I discovered is it's really the most one of the most wonderful, rewarding aspects of my entire career. The thing I've learned doing executive search work is that everyone who's looking to fill a senior position is looking for someone who's experienced and has demonstrated that they know how to do development work. And no one is able to find such a person. But the point is that as you move toward senior leadership positions or CEO positions or presidential positions, doing philanthropy and encouraging philanthropy and doing development work is a larger and larger and more important part of your experience and part of the toolbox that you need to bring to your vocational calling. And so it's important to think about it and talk about it, and that's what we'll do for the next hour. Marianne?
So I had a stellar undergraduate career at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. I loved every aspect of my collegiate experience. And one of those experiences was being editor of the student newspaper. And I love that role. I love the staff that I worked with. I love the role that the paper had in the community. But one of the things from that experience that I did not know about it when I became the editor was that I had a weekly meeting with the publisher of the paper, who was a man by the name of Paul J. Dovry, who was president of Concordia College at the time. And those meetings once a week with Dr. Dovry proved to be formative in my life in so many ways. When I graduated, I'd been a political science and journalism major. I really thought I was destined for the halls of the Capitol of Washington, D.C. I had a job offer to work for a congressman. But Paul Dovry said, I've got an idea. If you'd consider staying on and working with us at Concordia. And at that time, alumni operations, which had primarily been an event-centered activity at the college, was moving into something called the annual fund, or that were there ways that they could vitalize the constituency of alumni to be significant funders of the institution. And I was really intrigued by that proposition. I had a journalism professor who gave me one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had in making career decisions. And he said, go where you can learn the most. And that proved to be so prophetic. As I said, Concordia was moving into something that we called phone-a-thons in those days. This is 1980. And one of the greats in development in the whole Lutheran world was a man by the name of John Pierce, who worked for a very long time at Concordia, only recently retired. And that first morning in my office, he came in and he sat down and he said, Marianne, I want you to remember one thing as you start this job and maybe a lifetime of a career. He said, I want you to remember that every contact is a plus. Doesn't matter if you call them and they hang up on you. It doesn't matter if they've said, this is not the time for me to give. It doesn't matter if they give you a $5 million gift. What you're doing is you're bringing Concordia College into their consciousness every time you show up. And that is the gift. That is the cornerstone on which we build. And that piece of advice has stuck with me during my 35-year career in advancement, which I could have never imagined sitting on that precipice in that May morning of 1980. But it has been such a privilege. It was such a privilege and such a gift to be a part of that. And that's why I think Lauren and I both are really excited about this conversation this morning. And we've titled it The Culture of Philanthropy, Development, and Fundraising. If you take nothing away from this morning, it is the fact that please, please, please do not use those terms interchangeably. They're very different. They speak to very different aspects of this whole thing, and we look forward to unpacking that with you this morning.
Thank you. We'll go to the next slide and give you a preview here. We'll try and run through, these are the learning objectives for the morning. We'll talk about what is a culture of philanthropy, what are the characteristics of such a culture, then how do we build a culture, and the differences between development and fundraising as we get to the end. So Marianne's going to talk first of all about culture and what it means to work to create a culture of philanthropy within and around and through an organization.
So what is culture? We've touched on that during our first block of LECNA this fall, especially when we've been talking about strengths and we've been talking about, strategic planning, the great quote that culture eats strategy for lunch. So what is culture? So next slide, Tom, please. Most cultures are implicit, understood, but not spoken, residing in the language and habits of interactions between people. And this comes from a really fascinating book called The Radical Redesign of American Business, but so much of this is applicable to our cultures in higher ed and social service institutions as well. Next slide. This set of rarely articulated, largely unconscious, taken for granted beliefs, values, and norms, and judgmental assumptions the organization makes about itself, the nature of people in general, and its environment. Organizational culture consists of the set of unwritten rules that govern acceptable behavior within and even outside of the organization. So I know so many of you have institutions that have articulated values. You've worked with those values in the institutions. I've been on many of your campuses where there's very visible signs of those values, what those values mean. But this morning in particularly, we want to talk about that as it pertains to philanthropy and development, and yes, even fundraising. Next slide. So philanthropic culture, I loved Pat Tewson and his really love for language, love of words. So many of you know this better than I do, but philos is loving, anthropos is human beings. A philanthropic culture is the love of humanity in the sense of caring, nourishing, developing, and enhancing what it means to be human. And I think throughout our experiences, Lauren and mine together, our experiences separately, we have just found over and over that the privilege of doing development work is this sense of caring, nourishing, developing, and enhancing what it means to be human, both from the student, faculty, staff, administration, alumni, board, donors. I mean, it's really a cornucopia that has so much potential and so much to offer our institutions. Next slide. So I'd like you to take a couple minutes. I'm gonna give you about a minute to think about what do you think your institution's beliefs, norms, and values about philanthropy are, and your personal beliefs, values, and norms about the same thing: volunteering, development. When I'd say fundraising, what do you think of? When I say board of trustees, what do you think of? When I say donations, what do you think of? Just give a few minutes to think about it, both in terms of your institution and then also your own personal beliefs about that. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, so let's start with your institution's beliefs, values, and norms about philanthropy, fundraising, development. Anybody care to share what you think those are, or what it seems like to you?
I'm going to jump in on volunteer. And Laura, I can't see if you're here, Laura Couvessier, but I'd love to know whether you agree with me. So when we inaugurated Michael Thomas a couple of years ago, we created a day of service. Classes are canceled. Students, faculty, staff are invited to volunteer. We create all these stations, do all kinds of things. And my observation is we get a large number of students. I don't know that it's a huge percentage of our students, but a large number of students do volunteer, sometimes because their coaches volunteer them, sometimes because they want to help. Staff volunteer a huge amount of time. Not sure how much faculty do. And the messaging has been sort of, well, you know, try to be a good example, but I'm not sure whether faculty have, to be somewhat sharp, have displayed in their lives the virtues that they say they want to teach.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Oh.
Interesting.
Thank you, David, for sharing that.
Yeah. Others. What's the values in your organization about money?
I'd say I'm kind of in between organizations, so it's kind of hard to say, but from what I've observed at several different institutions, I think sometimes money and gifts and donations are ways that people want to preserve or promote a particular thing or agenda. And I don't mean agenda necessarily in a negative sense. It could be very positive. But I think sometimes there's a disconnect between that and kind of thinking about what's God calling us to do as an institution and how do we fund that. And so that's something I wrestle with a bit.
Thank you, Brian.
I would say for Augustana College, thoughts about money, use it wisely. Like anything you want to do, we need to do not an extensive, but we have to have some sort of cost benefit analysis. Why do you want to do it? Is this a good investment of our time, our resources, those sorts of things? And so because of where we are, not a huge endowment, right? We're always watching how we're spending money and thinking about the return on the investment. And so and I think that's kind of how I do in my personal life too, which is one of the reasons why what we do at Augustana resonates with me so well. So I think that's a challenge. And I'll also say about two other things. Volunteering, I think, is built into kind of the culture at Augustana. It's kind of an expectation for our students, and we encourage that also with our employees. And I feel like we're always fundraising. So we must really think that fundraising is a good thing because we're always doing it.
It seems like we're always doing the fundraising too. I guess there's a cynicism, but perhaps a truth behind this. There's the phrase that gets bandied about quite a bit, right? No money, no mission. So we do think about that. The other one too, you could kind of flip this. You're asking what our institutions believe or what we value about all of these topics, but the flip side, right? I've also heard the phrase, right? Show me your balance sheet or your budget and I'll tell you what your values are.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's an ordering of that too. And boy, this all feels so cynical, but the other thing that I'll say that our institution, maybe others struggle with too, a lot of these words on the screen, I think we compartmentalize them quite a bit, right? So when you start thinking about your advancement team or your alumni relations office, I'm not sure how well we get the entire campus integrated to support each of these endeavors.
Yeah.
Oh, Ben, thank you for that. That's a stellar point, right? I can't tell you in my career how many times faculty colleagues would refer to it as the dark arts. Kind of the evil they did. In fact, when we got to PLU, we had such a huge challenge in terms of developing a philanthropic culture. And one of the things, and I know I was a spouse, that's a whole nother story about how I ended up actually working in the development office, but I'll spare you that this morning. But one of the things that I intentionally did is go around and have coffee with different faculty and departments, talking about what philanthropy was, what the challenge was, what we could do for each other, and how absolutely important it was that the aspects of it were integrated together. And so that we actually got to get to know each other, to know what, someone like Lauren Causey, you could speak about this too, how absolutely important it is for the grants administration and the grants officer to be aware of what's happening in the faculty culture and to work in tandem with it rather than to be siloed like that. And so that's one of the things we'll continue to talk about in this, but thank you, Ben.
I was
What? Go ahead.
I was gonna say that at Gustavus, I'm always really impressed by the level of commitment from alumni to giving and volunteering and being a network, being connected. So those are the positive things. I think what Ben touched on is really interesting, kind of the internal culture that I've experienced since being there is that faculty members see the work of the development office on either end of a spectrum, one side being the sort of the money tree of like, go get me money to do this thing. The other end being the sort of dark arts thing that you talked about, Marianne, which is that a belief that all development does is take people out to dinner and that we waste money more than we bring it in, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. So again, that kind of siloed piece, right? Where we don't have a good understanding of each other. So how about your personal beliefs, norms, and values about those things?
I'll speak briefly on that. I mean, from my perspective, in admissions, that without advancement, without admissions, the two money-making offices on campus, there's no one making the money. And so without the students, without people asking, alumni, how do you fund this? How do you keep the lights on and the doors open and the professors paid and all of that stuff? I mean, it's just the crucial thing that makes colleges work is students and alumni to ask, or who were former students.
Well said.
This is Gerard. I think that as I get to know my colleagues, like personally, I have a certain thought about, you know, what it takes to be able to do development, to be able to cultivate a culture of philanthropy. I think there's value in it. I think it's important. I think it's extremely important in faith-based institutions. Sometimes when I speak with my colleagues, other faculty members, they only see like one little piece of the big picture, right? Where they're saying, well, students are paying so much to go to this school and to learn from me. And so, you know, all of the money should be directed in this realm because they're here for the learning. When that's such a small piece, right, of everything that happens at a university, the classroom experience. And to understand teaching and learning from just the perspective of students you have in your class or in your course is not a correct understanding of that type of thing. And so I constantly go back and forth in my mind with that thought.
Oh, Gerard, were you done?
Yeah, I got some kind of echo, sorry. So I
That's
constantly
okay.
in my mind go back and forth with like, how do I get my colleagues, other faculty members to see the value in this, right? Rather than just to say, oh, well, I mean, they're asking for another thing, or, you know, they're gatekeeping what I can do or what I can't do. Yeah.
Oh, and that's so well said, Gerard. Again, that gets at culture, right? That gets at culture about how we function. We can have the best laid plans in the world and the best laid out campaign for X number of things. But what's happening with the culture around it? And so really great point. Anyone else?
Just to kind of piggyback off of Gerard and David's comments about faculty, one thing that I've seen is that I wouldn't put all faculty in front of potential donors or constituents, but some of them just don't know, right? Because in graduate school, no one teaches you how to interact with donors or the board of trustees or whomever. So, you know, finding a few, not all, but a few faculty who are maybe a little bit more keened into other people and not just themselves, but kind of walking with them on how to engage with donors and how to work with them, I think is a really important type of professional development for them. And I think that's where you might be able to shift culture a little bit if you provide them with that support.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, great point, Erin. Great point. Because, and again, that talks about culture, right? That talks about culture about, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. Oh, that's a great point.
Mary Ann, Lauren's got her hand raised too.
I'm just going to jump in quickly and say that as an outsider to the work of advancement before my current role, one of the perceptions I had toward the work was that it was sometimes exploitative toward those who are in need. The way that the stories are told about students who are disadvantaged or otherwise wouldn't be able to thrive without your donation and whatnot. And so I've been thinking about ways to tell stories and do the work in ways that are affirming to students and have a strengths-based approach and don't kind of sort of like exploit students' stories in that way, in ways that I kind of was seeing as an outsider.
Great. Another great point too. And, you know, students are some of our best storytellers. that's one of the things I learned throughout my career in advancement is that, it is really powerful to have students tell the story. And, but you don't, like Erin said, you don't just throw them into it and just say, tell your story. I mean, they have to understand the constituency in which they're telling the story. In all of my professional positions in Lutheran higher education, I've always had a student leadership cadre and component where we were educating students about philanthropy and teaching them how to share their stories and giving them opportunities to interact with donors and faculty and other parts of the constituency, and proved to be so, I was the conduit in that. Mike, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just real quick. I know you probably want to move on to the next slide, but obviously as an admissions and financial aid person, I fully understand the importance and the need for a strong philanthropic culture. I have seen as a financial aid professional as federal and state funding has just remained flat over a number of years. Fundraising and scholarship support has become ever more important in order to give students access to the institution, and it creates a little bit of tension. It can give a lot of power to donors as well, especially big donors, because they have a big financial stake in the institution at that point. And it can become. I've seen tension sometimes between when a donor becomes a significant, donor at the institution. There become tension between maybe a direction the university wants to move and what those donors' own, beliefs and values are in terms of maybe what the institution should remain to be like. I don't know if that makes sense, but
good point.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Gerard, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, first of all, to Lauren's point, just to expand on her point, I think she said this. I think she was speaking more towards the way the stories are told to make it seem like when one gives, they will directly impact the life of that kind of student to make their life better directly, right? Where that might not always happen in the way that maybe a giver thinks it would happen. So I think that that's what she was touching on, and that really resonates with me because I get worried when we tell stories like that. I've been a story that's told like that, right? And it didn't show up in Pastor Boland's bank account. So I just don't want anybody to have to tell a story in that way, in order to make something happen. The other piece of what I really wanted to share was I also the dark side of this for me is again, the fear that he who writes the check writes the rules, right? That's a church fundraising thing that we say, that if you have a person who's giving a lot of money towards a certain corner of what they want, or a sacred cow of what they want to come forth, they just have such power to write so many rules, and that's really scary for me. And I think for other faculty members, there's fear in that too, right? If a certain program has a lot of support behind it, what does that mean? How do the people in those offices manage those expectations?
Absolutely. Wow. And that is so great. You've just given us the lead into the next part, because without the culture grounding that, there can always be the perceptions about that. So I'll turn it over to Lauren to talk about characteristics of a culture of philanthropy. And Tom, the next slide.
I think one of the speeches I made thousands of times when I was in the president's chair, it probably had little enduring impact, but I always felt good when I made it. And that is when I interviewed a prospective faculty member, I talked to them about we wanted them to come and teach their specialty and to be an active member of the department. But if they were coming to Pacific Lutheran University, we had a third expectation, and that is that they were joining a university community, and that the execution of the mission of the university was a part of their responsibility as an individual faculty member. I said the same thing to staff on a regular basis. Because I think a part of what, and we'll get to this, a part of what the way we get beyond the silo begins with mission. Because it's mission where we find our common focus and our common endeavor. And I'm talking as an old man now, but I've been around our institutions for a long time. And what has happened, colleges and universities church-wide, is we've moved increasingly to a professionalization and a specialization of our individual tasks. It used to be the case that there were no people trained in admissions work, so you simply hired the people who were most enthusiastic about the institution and tried to teach them admissions. There were no trained development people, so you hired the most enthusiastic people and they helped them figure out how they do development work. And we put that mission institution identification first. And now we put the professionalization, specialization feature first. And I think that has made it harder for us to maintain an institution-wide focus. That's a long-winded point, but it's something I've really observed the change now over the 50 years that I've been involved in working with our Lutheran institutions. Let's go to the characteristics of a culture of philanthropy. People in the institution act as ambassadors and engage in relationship building. This is the idea of everybody understanding that the work we do is ultimately relational and that they are, in fact, and do represent the institution, whether they're shopping for groceries or speaking at a service club or attending a church event or working with their parent group at school. Development is understood and valued as a mission-aligned part of the organization. We've talked this morning, your great sharing, all kinds of attitudes about development work. I had them myself. I couldn't believe I would ever want to do it. Discovered that it's rich, vital kind of work and so central to the mission of the institution. And we need to try and cultivate that sort of understanding within our institutions. And I think we do it in part by giving people the sort of experiences you talked about, the chance of a faculty member to meet with a donor and to tell their story, to tell what they're doing, the chance of a student group to see a group of donors and tell them what they're doing as students in the institution. We come to understand that this is a part of what we do and enables what we do in a way that's better understood and more positively regarded. Everyone is able to articulate a case for giving. Everyone in the organization should know that donations for student financial aid, for program X, Y, or Z, for campus ministry at the University of Minnesota are essential for that program to work.
And one of the amazing things we've seen happen with some of this is that some of the groundskeepers and dining service people are some of the most articulate ambassadors for this. And we could go on, we're like every development person in the world. We've got a million stories in our pocket. And so we'll try to keep those to a minimum today. But when it gets to that level, when the people who actually work at the institution, who work in food services, who work in grounds are part of that story, it's a really beautiful and powerful thing.
I've never forgotten one of my early days at development at Concordia when the groundskeeper named Arden Toso. We had a fundraising club approach, $1,000 over 4 years got you in the C400 club, the Concordia 400 club. And Arden came into the office and joined the C400 club with $1,000 in cash that he had saved out of his paychecks over many years because he dreamed someday about being a C400 club member. It's one of those, you talk about the widow's mite. versus the major gift. It's one of the great stories, Argentoso. Impact stories are told and shared throughout the institution and broader constituencies. I gave a State of the University address every year. I tried every year to include at least one or two donor stories in that State of the University address, because it was a one moment when you could share with the entire community that our work was being abled by a cloud of witnesses who believed in what we were doing. And then leadership that starts with the leader of the organization, the senior officers, and certainly the governing board understand the importance of philanthropy, advancing the culture of philanthropy, and they are personally invested and they are financially supportive. You cannot afford board members who are not financially invested in the institution at a level that is appropriate for them. That means that some will be invested in small ways and some in very, very large ways. But that kind of financial participation that shows the way. I remember working with one board where not participating financially was a badge of pride. And the argument was, we are so smart and able and committed. We bring all of our time and talent to this organization. We're not just here before our money. That's a false analysis. You need to be here or there for your time and talent, but you also need to be there to make a charitable investment in the organization if you hope that it will be an organization that has a true culture of philanthropy.
Okay, next slide.
How do you build it? That, of course, is the riddle. How do you build and support a culture of philanthropy? And
you've got a hand up, just adding. I don't know if Gerard, if that's left over or not.
Sure.
Gerard?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, is your hand up?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay, all right, good. Just watching.
Okay, so first, an ongoing focus on mission, planning, and campaign are all connected at the leadership level. The president, the institutional leadership, and the board are clear and personally invested. We had a model of leadership that we used over the years, that the first thing you needed to do was be clear about your mission. You needed to do a strategic plan. And every strategic plan that you did informed a set of priorities that became the campaign. So that hopefully you had your community united behind and around the priorities that had grown out of the planning process. And then you could go to your constituency and say, this is where we want to go as an institution. Now you can help us get there. And so that the donor involvement becomes tied to the central directions and priorities and focus and ultimately mission of the institution. We did that 3 times in our work at Pacific Lutheran University, and it yielded some $300 million in current and future support over the time we were there. But we were always able to talk to donors about how their gift was tied to what the community and the board had were the top priorities. And that, I think, really makes a difference. It gives the donor a chance to buy into a larger story. Development is understood, viewed, and valued as a mission-aligned part of the institution. We just talked about that. I think tying into planning and mission is how you do that. You support and reinforce everyone's role as an ambassador. We can't expect people to be ambassadors unless, as a couple of you pointed out so beautifully, we include that in our staff and faculty growth and development program, that we engage them in the process so that they, in fact, are equipped and understand what it means to be an ambassador. We share and know the philanthropic stories. Oh my, it's whole important to hold those stories up. We've all dealt with the anonymous donor who says, I don't want people to know what I've done. But what I always found is if you sat down with them and said, you know, you will share your story, not because you know, you're going to be aggrandized by it, but because it will help inspire others. And donors understand that because they themselves are inspired by others. And so in the end, developing and understanding and valuing this kind of philanthropic culture where the donor community, the development work is a central part of achieving the mission and executing the program is where all of this heads.
We had kind of an interesting experience in our first years of coming out of the PLU experience, in that we were asked to chair a comprehensive campaign for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. The church body at large had never done a comprehensive campaign. And so we were at all times in the 6 years with a goal of $200 million, trying to work on building a culture of philanthropy within the mothership of the ELCA. And it was fascinating to know, and reaffirmed our experience, that these are absolutely essential in doing that. And in building, not just for the campaign, although all of the things that were identified in the campaign were essential, right? But building this ongoing culture of support and philanthropy.
And you know, philanthropy is always, we talk about a coalition of the willing. This is never going to be complete, and an institution is never going to be of one mind about this. And we had that reinforced for us working in the ELCA. I mean, I don't think we ever got to the point where over about 70% of the bishops contributed to the campaign. So you had 30% of your synodical bishops, the key public leaders in each synod in the church, not participating in the campaign. But we were able to succeed without them. And the same will be true when we talk about faculty engagement on our campuses, our student engagement in campus ministry, or our members of our congregations that are raising money to pay back their loan to the Mission Investment Fund. It's always going to be a portion of the people who step forward and show the way. And the key thing about this is that enough people in our experience will step forward so that the ELCA was able to gather 250 million instead of 200. But it didn't mean that this was that there was a unanimous response in favor of the campaign.
Okay, next slide. So this is a really key understanding that, you know, development is relational activity. It's long-term. Fundraising is transactional, short-term, annual. Let me see if I can drop this into a way of knowing that all of you have experienced. I know here in the Midwest, one of the really big things for the colleges and universities and a lot of the nonprofit organizations is Giving Day, right? And they'll identify the needs for Giving Day. We'll put a lot of time and energy sending out the mail pieces, what our goal is, how much we're going to raise, what it's for. That is fundraising at its best. And does it need to happen? Absolutely. That's kind of the front door. Open the door. Relational long-term building of these connections, building of the capacity, both, and I'll use the university as an example, on campus and off campus, a continual cultivating of your board, a continual cultivating of your faculty, staff, student, so that there's some understanding about what these relationships have to do with the institution. And this is really fundamental. People use these terms interchangeably, and they are not interchangeable.
I'm on the board of Lutheran Social Services, as I mentioned yesterday, working with Pat and also on their foundation board. And LSS of Minnesota is in the process of moving from a fundraising focus to a development focus. And where we're trying to put more emphasis on building the long-term relationships that yield the significant gifts. I was a part of securing Concordia College in Moorhead's first multi-million-dollar gift, $5 million to start the Centennial campaign in the late 80s. And the person who gave that gift had been in a relationship with Concordia College for 34 years. They sent 5 children graduated, all 5 of their children graduated from the college. Suddenly, the patriarch of the family served on the Board of Regents for 8 years. And it was after his time on the board that he and his wife agreed to give a $5 million gift to lead the Centennial campaign. He was capable of that gift in far earlier, and everyone would have been very happy had they decided to make their gift earlier. But I've always lived with that story simply as a way of reminding me and teaching me that there's a life cycle to every donor. And you're really living out through a generational relationship development process where those of us who move along, we get to the point where we are more and more in position to think not about acquiring assets, but about sharing them. And is at that stage of life that the most significant gifts tend to be made.
So Tom, next slide, and we broken it down into metrics and motives. I think these are some things, and think about your institution, think about the information that's shared about advancement, about fundraising, right? So fundraising, you'll see transactional metrics usually called out: the attrition rate, cost per dollar raised, average lifetime value, renewals, percentage of attendees, response rate, percentage of board giving, email open rates, upgrades, downgrades, number of face-to-face solicitations, email click-through rates, net ticket revenue. All of those are really great and important metrics. I think for all of you involved in this kind of day of giving fundraising campaign, these are absolutely essential things to know. We should know them. But when we're talking about developing this philanthropic culture, the motives are more important to be tuned into than the metrics. And it's really important that you understand the difference between these two. In the philanthropic case, it's attendance at programs and relevant events. It's increasing the connection between the donor and the work of the institution. It's donor and employee satisfaction. You heard Pat talk about that yesterday, doing those surveys, understanding of what's happening with the culture of the people that you work with at the institution. It's also true of donors. You know, how is the donor base feeling? What's their heartfelt commitment to the institution, not just for writing the checks to control, but really being a part of that endeavor and sharing what we have. That there are mission moments for staff, board, and donors, share the story. And then we can't underscore this last one, that the leader of this effort needs to be at the presidential and cabinet level. And I would even argue, and Lauren, you could weigh in on this, is that without a president who's personally invested in the development side of this activity, it's very difficult to build a culture of philanthropy.
Right. So we have thrown a lot at you. We've thrown a perspective at you. I think it's reflects our individual work and our work together for several decades now. I went back and did an analysis, and when we finished the church campaign, I discovered that I had personally been involved in leading 7 campaigns that started with a campaign for $10 million back in the 1970s. And 3 campaigns at Pacific Lutheran, and none the work with the church, and now you can't keep a drunk out of a bar, and so now I find myself at LSS and right back in the middle of planning another campaign, and not complaining about it. It's fabulous work. One of the things that throws us off about development is the image of salespersonship. The idea that you're somehow selling an idea to a donor, that you're talking them into something, that you're going to talk them out of the South 40 or their third born child. And you know, one of my reflections after 40 some years of working at this is that I've never raised a nickel that a donor didn't want to give. All I've ever been able to do is demonstrate the consistency between the donor's values and interest and inclination to be charitable with what the particular organization or institution I was representing was doing at the moment. And in fact, I believe in the end that philanthropy has a greater impact on the donor than it does on the donee. And we have experienced, as I'm sure many of you have, time and time again, that people are fundamentally changed when they become really generous philanthropists. And to see that change, the Grinch's heart really does grow in a way that's quite remarkable. And for me, it's been one of the most satisfying aspects of being involved in philanthropic work, is to see that the impact, when a donor decides to invest in a cause that's larger than themselves, more enduring than themselves, more far-reaching than their self-interest, it really does grow a person's heart. And that's why I think that development work is really a ministry at its finest.
And, you know, to Gerard's point too, you know, in our years of working together and individually, and I think of some of the major gifts that some of our donors have made. They've not been made with a need to control. Those gifts by and large have been a result of an entire cadre of people within the community who have invested in developing that relationship. And it has huge, as Lauren says, huge impact on the donor. I have not experienced any of those gifts where the donor thought it entitled them to control the project or control the piece, where they felt like they wanted more undue influence. I've really seen this incredible capacity of the donor to give because they had something to offer to something that was greater than themselves. So,
yeah, I think the cat who fell out of the tree is what makes the news story. And so when there are conflicts between donors and institutions, we read about it in the newspaper, and it does happen. But this is a human endeavor where you're bringing people together to accomplish projects, and there are going to be breakdowns in relationship. But for the most part, we've been privileged to work with donors over many years whose fundamental interest is the mission of the institution and seeing the institution thrive and succeed. And I think that's sometimes those horror stories are used as an excuse not to undertake philanthropic endeavors. And they're used to say this work is dangerous or can be evil, and all of that can be true, but those are really the exceptions and not the rule. We've got about 5 minutes. If any questions, comments from around the room, we took a risk here. We've got some advancement experts sitting listening to us who might have
other perspectives.
Nuance or correction or emendation to offer?
Hey, Lauren and Marianne, that's amazing information. One of the things that I found interesting in Concordia was how long it takes to build a culture of philanthropy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's a lifetime work, right?
It is.
It's a lifetime work.
And so when you have boards that aren't structured for philanthropy, and so board structure impacts it, and then the kind of history of the institution in terms of funding impacts it. So for whatever it's worth for everybody, don't get frustrated if it's going to take a long time, because advancement work is the long game. Like they pointed out in fundraising, is a short game.
It's very hard to change the expectation of board members.
Yeah.
Board members come on to a board without the expectation that philanthropy is a part of their role. It's very, very difficult to do that. That's why when we got bold enough, figured this out after a decade and a half or so, that every time we invited someone to join the board, we said, a part of what we're asking you to do is become a philanthropist in support of the university at a level that works for you. We expect you to give to the annual fund, to give to campaigns, and to put us in your estate. And if you aren't willing to do that, you really shouldn't be on the board. And if you set that expectation at the beginning, it's a whole different thing than if you try and build it once they've come on the board without it.
Well, and that's a trust thing, right? If you go back to Brené's model of trust, you need to be able to articulate the boundaries, the reliability, the accountability, and the integrity of all of that. And that is a trust thing. I've been recruited for a couple of boards as of late, and there has been no conversation about that at all. Now, it's not surprising to me that the giving rate among the board is less than half. So,
Brian, you had your hand up.
I did. I think you already answered it. Tom said something about a board that's structured for philanthropy, and I was curious about, what that looked like exactly. I think particularly at our Lutheran colleges, when there are members of the board that are clergy. Sometimes there's a feeling that there's too many clergy on the board because they can't give enough, etc. I'm just, so I was just thinking about that, but I think you kind of already answered that.
well, and it gets down to this act. If you've got people who are at the caliber and have the expertise that you want on your board, you want your advancement people to know those people. Yes, they may be a bishop in the church, right? But you'd want to get to have some kind of personal relationship, knowing what sparks their interest, and I think this is the development activity, rather than just coming in every year with a fundraising campaign and saying, we expect everybody to give. That I think that's the difference in that. Is that helpful, Brian?
And Marianne, if I can, in how the board is structured in terms of, if 4 of your positions on your board are people you don't have a vote on them being on the board, that's a whole different case. And or more that just are on there through a variety of political processes and things like that. Then you end up with a board that's much more difficult. And in fact, I'll give my example at Concordia, Texas. We were so far off in terms of culture that for the most part, the board was pretty irrelevant to our giving, which is a really step back from capability.
Yeah. Well, Marianne and I said at the beginning, we love this subject. If we can ever be helpful to any of you in your respective roles as these subjects come up, you know where we are. But thanks for the hour. Tom, I'll throw it to you. Tom, you're muted.
Muted. Thanks. Good point. I'm still muted. So carries on, and we're going to go ahead and begin our intercultural competence piece so we can finish by 12 o'clock. So first, I will set up the screen, and we will break into groups here as we think about some questions, but this is one of our last touch points on intercultural competence in your program. And one of the things we thought we'd do from the very beginning, bring back from the very beginning, is the question of why. Why do we care about this, and why is it important to each of us personally and within our organization and at an institutional level? And there's some logical arguments to this, but there are some because it's right arguments. So we know the world we live in. It's different, it's interconnected, and and today our students should certainly well aware of this, of how the movement back and forth across political borders, whether it's in communications and Twitter, or whether it's physical, has made us deeply interconnected and I'd almost say dependent economically on those around us. Our national, regional, and local communities are growing more diverse in all dimensions. And it's sort of a history of our country for immigration. We need to be competent because we're leaders in our institution. We have to be able to serve these communities that may be different for us. And if you remember back in the very beginning, we talked about the history of our institutions and how they were built by immigrants as they came into the United States about preserving identity. So if you were Lutheran, you went to a Lutheran church and you sent your kids to a Lutheran school, and then eventually you sent them to a Lutheran university. We are not the same. We don't have the same background as we did back 50 to 100 years ago in terms of this question of identity. So I think one of the challenges within our institutions is to say, how does our identity as a Lutheran institution impact our ability to serve diverse communities? And our personal goal is to develop you as global learners and leaders. But here's the real reason. The real reason is to serve our neighbor. The foundational reason for this is that Christ has called us to reach out and to serve those around us. It's maybe I should put that one up in the top, and then we do the others down below. But it's this calling of, as people of faith, that we look out to these communities, and it's a part of vocation and calling, right? It's a personal vocation and calling, but it's an institutional vocation and calling to serve those around us because God has called us to do that. So if you remember back, we began this in the Intercultural Development Plan. Carrie worked with y'all on the IDI to begin thinking about your experiences both within communities and workplaces yourselves and your personal goals, and help identify challenging situations. The next step, and we talked about it in the mid-year, was to engage with folks that are different, that seek out somebody of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds for conversations, more than one. I think you can also engage in this way at a personal level by seeking out literature, and we've given you some of those things, or books and articles written by people with a different perspective from a different ethnic and cultural background for conversations. And so there's a whole variety. I sent Ann asked about a reading list. I read a lot about the subcontinent since we lived there, and it's a whole different perspective. There's just a number. So I'm saying, talk to people and listen in this process. And then finally, today, we're going to talk a little bit more about engaging different at your institution. First of all, understanding it with some key indicators, and then also then moving to say, here are issues, or here are things that we look for that are blocks that prohibit people from fully engaging in our institution or even coming to begin with. So the why, the who, and the how. Okay, as we go through this, we just always want to be clear on what those are and how they're going down the road. And I will now pass to Carrie.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Good to see all of you again this morning. I think, just important to note that this is really an inside out process, right? That we have to really understand ourselves first, understand our own culture, how that influences our norms, our values, our actions, our reactions, in order to be able to better understand other. And so as we think about, again, those steps in the plan, that it's this personal journey that then moves into this space of engaging with other, with difference, with the richness of God's creation in the world. So this perspective, we've actually talked about this quote before, but just want to bring it back to kind of have you consider it when it comes to your institution. So this is a perspective, Eboo Patel, he talks about the work that's been done by Diana Eck from Harvard, and she describes diversity. She emphasizes is simply the fact of people with different identities, backgrounds, and worldviews living in close quarters. So we've heard this, right? Diversity is about the numbers, it's kind of the facts, it's the who. Pluralism, then, in Eck's definition, is the energetic engagement of difference towards positive ends. Diversity, in other words, is simply a demographic fact. Pluralism is a hard-won achievement. So we bring this perspective for your consideration. We also think about equity, we think about inclusion, but this idea of pluralism, I think, kind of grasps at those different concepts in important ways and maybe in a new way. And we have a video where we actually have Diana Eck describing this. It's a short, like 4 minutes. So we thought that it would be helpful to hear from her as we think about what this means for our institutions.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. And here's checking to see if we actually managed to pull this off with sound. So if you do hear this, give us a thumbs up.
How do we all live together in a society of increasing diversity? That's a critical question of our time, and especially here in the United States, where religious and cultural diversity are present as never before. Immigration, old immigration from all the countries of Europe, and new immigration over the last half century from literally all over the world. And we encounter that diversity at every turn, in our schools and colleges, in our society, whether it's our civil society of city councils and legislatures, or our businesses and hospitals. Encountering that diversity is pluralism. Pluralism isn't just the fact of diversity, but what we make of it and how we handle it. Pluralism is a real achievement that gets us beyond the ghettos of our isolation from one another into relationship with each other. And pluralism isn't just tolerance. Tolerance, sure enough, is a good civic virtue, but pluralism requires something of us. We, as Sikhs and Hindus, as Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Buddhists, and ardent secularists, we actually need to know something about each other and to begin to excavate and dig up those deep stereotypes and fears and half-baked truths that have plagued our relationship for too long. And pluralism isn't just wishy-washy relativism. It requires that we claim our differences, come to our relationship with our differences, not shedding them, but engaging our commitments in a common society. And it requires that give and take of dialogue, of speaking and listening, of criticism and self-criticism, the traffic of relationships that is so important in the society that is now ours. Pluralism is an ethic that brings us to the table with our differences, whether it's our family dinner table or whether it's the table of our legislatures and city councils and schools. And pluralism enables us, all of us, to claim anew what it means to say, we the people of the United States of America, a wider we, a we in which our belonging is not premised on our religion or our culture, but our common life as co-citizens. That is pluralism.
Thanks, Tom. Good job with the technology. So any kind of initial thoughts on that? If you want to put something in chat or unmute, is this a new idea for you? Is this something that you've heard before? Does this resonate? Does this give you new language as you think about how to work across differences? Not all at once.
Excuse me. I'm kind of stuck in listening to that, because she's got it flipped the way a sociologist would describe this. Her definition of pluralism gives that concept more credit than we would. And she talked about, I think, wishy-washy relativism, which we would put that as cultural relativism as a higher order of that, and pluralism is the more of the living in tandem, but not really the engagement. So that's what I'm interested with that perspective, and struggling with the language, and if I'm buying into what she's saying or countering it in my head right now. It was interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Yeah, really, I think new language for me as we think about this concept of inclusion, that to me, some of the language that she describes is similar. This idea of really embracing each other's differences, starting from a place of understanding our own, inviting those differences to the table, but then taking that to this common commitment. Is maybe that step that sometimes maybe we're not thinking about or talking about or articulating as much, where we say everyone needs a seat at the table, which I think is very true. And then what does that mean for us as we commit to a common goal, purpose, vision, mission? And I think that's an opportunity as we think about what it means to lead within our organizations and our institutions, fitting that mission centerpiece. And that's something I think, Tom, it just reminded me when Tom was introducing this, the concept of our own cultural competency, but then also the institutional competency of really understanding the institution, who we are as an institution or as an organization, what our role is in the community. And when we have a better understanding of that and be able to live that can hopefully then provide clarity to how we engage in the world. Lauren.
Thanks. I was going to say that I'm surprised by the video, and the way that the topic is being discussed feels a bit anodyne to me. In no place in the video did she refer to systemic inequality as the reason that there is a persistent lack of diversity in all of our institutions. And I think the elision of that topic makes me question sort of her premise. I think, starting at a place where we recognize how we got to this place, and it's not only, based on immigrants, but based on people who were brought here against our will, and then racial violence perpetrated against a lot of people, and then systemic inequalities that have excluded a lot of people from the institutions that we care about is why we have arrived at this conversation. And I didn't hear any of that embedded in her discussion in the video.
Lauren, I think that's a great point. I think she would be very comfortable with the discussion. We only took a 4-minute picture here to talk about it, but I think you're absolutely right. And so anyways, we could spend a longer time on that, but we just did take this little slice, but that's a great point. Absolutely.
And I think oftentimes not, again, Lauren, your point is not often considered, right? Like, how do we get to this place instead of just saying, well, here's where we are. And where's the accountability and the responsibility about getting to where we are. So I really appreciate that insight. Monica.
Yeah, I think my comment champions both what Tim and Lauren have said here. And I think that Dr. Eck comes from more of a religious background in terms of her studies, and there's some assumptions with the term pluralism, an assumption of equity and equality, that just as we think about the very dimensions of diversity and culture and inclusion, that the assumption assumes that there's already some equity and that there's not only an interest, but a commitment, right, to pull people along. And so while it gets everybody at the table, I think it is important to note that when we talk about the various dimensions of diversity, inequity is inherent in that. And unless and until we address the inequity, we're fooling ourselves to believe that we can truly be pluralistic. We're not a pluralistic society, have never been a pluralistic society. And so I just have some challenges with the language. I think it's beyond semantics. But, you know, to Tom's point, it's only a 4-minute video. Still, I think couched a lot more in religion than all of the dimensions of diversity.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, Monica. Yeah, I think we share this as another perspective as we go into thinking about our organizations, our institutions. How are we engaging in this work? Are we aware of the challenges that Monica, that Lauren shared? Are we actually acknowledging the inequities at the table? Do we think as an institution, as long as we invite, that that's enough? Or do we actually engage in the real work of understanding that there is, there's power, there's privilege, there's unspoken rules, there's cultural norms, quote unquote, that are led by the majority culture within the institution. And if we're not able to dig into that, how will we then individually and organizationally start to affect change? So as we move to the next slide, we want to think about, so Patel actually adds 3 different dimensions to pluralism that maybe provide a little bit more content for consideration. So he defines pluralism as an ethic that has 3 parts. So respect for different identities, relationships between diverse communities, and a commitment to the common good. So as we think about your institution, your organization, is there a respect inherent for different identities? Is it clearly stated? Are all identities welcome? Is it just some identities? Is it the ones that we're more comfortable with? What about those relationships? Is it really just about, again, where we say, of course, we want to invite everyone to be a part of our community, but there's actually not really relationships between the differences. There's very segmented, maybe communities, student populations, staff, faculty that aren't connecting, aren't really embracing and engaging across those differences. So again, feeling like, well, I'm welcome, but I don't really have a place at the within the institution. I have to find my own place. Is there a space where we actually can work together across our differences? And then is there commitment to the common good? Is there a commitment, a clarity of values, of vision, of mission that we can all get behind that actually resonates and makes sense for everyone within their own perspective? That it's not this majority perspective or this traditionally white perspective of saying, this is what good looks like, this is what our mission and purpose is, this is what we're called to do. But is that commitment actually understood from a variety of perspectives, able to be embedded in our core, so that whoever is doing the work of the organization of the institution can feel confident and comfortable in being able to live that commitment? So those are some components that we want to actually spend the bulk of our time kind of thinking about today. So we want to tie in some of the work that you've been doing within your intercultural development plan. And we're going to give you some time to think about about a couple things. So one is your goal. Maybe you have a goal that you've tied into your project. Maybe you have a goal, your personal goal that you're working on. I talked with all of you about some ideas for consideration for this. It might be something that you're already doing. It might be something that you're still kind of thinking about, wondering how this will fit into all of the work that you are currently doing. So want to check in on how, where you're at with that. And then to think about some of the challenging situations or barriers that you would face in light of, thinking about what we just talked about, the challenges of the organization. Are they committed to this work? Who are the kind of accountability partners? Who are the holders of resources and commitments? How will your structural facets of your institution, how does that include or exclude people from your institution? How do the structural realities impact your personal goals? So as we think about your goals, part of the plan is to develop then some potential barriers that could get in the way. So that's that step 3.0. And these barriers can be anything from time. I just don't have the time to do this. I don't have the mental capacity. I was just reading an article over a break about how we as a country are languishing. And I've like totally glommed onto that word because I feel like it's so accurate in describing this kind of sense of like, oh my gosh, when is this ever going to end or be different? Or is it never? Is it, what do we do? How do we do it? So time might be just, I don't have the mental energy, let alone the kind of time set aside. So if that's the case, when will you have time? How could you make time? Is it about accountability? Do you need to have your integrity partner, come alongside with you in this work? Or is it someone that you connect with within your organization or your institution? What about vulnerability? Are you able to ask the questions that you need to have answered? Are you able to talk and process with people openly and honestly about the experiences that you're having within your institution? What about leadership? Do you feel like you have the authority to make the change? Is this a priority of leadership? Do you feel like you're the only one that's trying to articulate something that is just going again into the same kind of void? Where are you at with your kind of sense of agency and authority? And maybe it's about resources, maybe it's about budget, maybe it's about prioritization. As we all have more and more on our plates, how are we thinking about how we can prioritize this work? So as we think about this in our small groups, we know that this isn't just then about what we bring. It is really about working together, working collaboratively. So as we think again about that inside out process, it's not just about ourselves, it's about how we engage with others. And so we just want to note, it's so important that you're asking people on your campus, within your institution or organization, that don't have the same identities that you have. What is then their experience? How are they feeling about these questions? How are you connecting with them? How are you hearing their stories, their experiences? Are you doing that in a way that's meaningful, or is it more as a token like, oh, that was nice, thanks? Or are you actually helping, letting that help shape the future of the institution? So all of this is to say, we're going to turn you into your small groups and give you like 25 minutes to really just dig into some of these. I sent you an email with the questions that are on this, and I'll also put it into the chat so that you'll have this within your small groups. But we want to, again, give you some real time to spend in community with one another, just digging into some of these questions, and we'll let the spirit move you. If you take one of those questions and want to go deep dive, that's awesome. If you don't get to all of them, that's totally okay. All right.
Great.
So Jessica, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, just real quick, Lauren, I really appreciated your comments. And, I would probably change when we wrote this up, what structural facets of your institution, it's also structural and historic, kind of the history of where you've been. So I think about that when you all look at this question in your small groups. So both structural and historic, culturally in the United States as a whole, but also your institution.
Great.
Jessica, you ready to put us into groups?
Yes, I am. All right.
Okay, go for it.
And maybe bring us back at 11:50.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, I have not gone anywhere. Oh,
I think as you're the host, you can pop in and out. Am I talking to Lauren or Tom? There we are. Hey, Lauren. Lauren Anderson, you're in group 2.
Yeah, I'm just hanging out.
Okay, gotcha.
Too, because some parts of the history are worth keeping and taking forward, but obviously some parts should undergo critique as well. So I liked having that balance there at Augsburg, the way they talked about the history.
how about other thoughts on this?
Well,
Oh, and
Lauren,
by the way, Diana Eck does come from a religious point of view. She actually is part of the Harvard Divinity School. So
okay.
Yeah, that was another great point. We didn't do her bio or things like that. We probably should have. Go ahead, Tiffany. I'm sorry.
no, I appreciated your comment, Lauren, because I was sort of taking notes, and I was thinking about, it made me stop and think about sort of the history of the ELCA. I work for an ELCA institution, and thinking about, how do we reach
Oh, well.
It's always so hard because it's always like mid-story that we get pulled back in. So
I know it's not fair, Carrie.
I know, right?
We need a whole afternoon of this.
I know. I know. I felt like in our group, we probably tackled about, a very small percentage of what we could and should be talking about. And as we kind of, come to the kind of wrap up in the conclusion of this part is just to be mindful of, again, the complexity of this work. And each one of you is dealing with different challenges because the organization, the institution that you work for, the community that you live in, the openness to thinking about some of these concepts or not. Critical race theory is something that's applauded at some institutions and is terrifying, right? As parents are saying, wait, my kids aren't learning that, are they? Right? And so there's to know that in this group that we have that kind of diversity is really, I think, important and unique because so often we surround ourselves with people that are, within our own organizations, institutions, and communities, we're hearing the similar kind of perspectives. But in this space, we get to actually come together and think about, well, boy, this challenge, I don't have to deal with that at my institution. Wow, I hadn't even thought about that. And to be able to think from the organizations or institutions that have been able to get some traction, what lessons have they learned that they can share with others, but also knowing that you're in unique situations. So it's not like, oh, here's the formula, here's the magic, solution, and just apply it, right? That's not how it works, that each institution, organization has to have their unique approach to this work. But I hope that you can hear from each other this richness of experience, of ideas, but also challenge, and that you can be a safe space to be able to provide maybe just a listening ear, maybe some insights, maybe some advice, maybe just a place to, again, just kind of lament some of the challenges. The other thing I think that's so important and heard in my group, and I'm sure you felt in your group, is just this is work that has no end. This is something that we commit to and recommit to and commit and recommit year over year over year. And it's hard because, I think about it, like I won't see in my lifetime probably like these huge, I hope I'll see like significant change, but I assume that there'll still be structural racism in place. And, that this is something that we have to commit to for the long haul. And that we can't think, though, like, it's just so much that I won't do it, right? Like, it's just too much work. It's too much time. It's too much energy. I don't even know where to begin. So I'll just kind of shelf it and hope to get to it next year or the next year. But instead to say, how do we, kind of commit to this as the journey, as the long journey, as the lifelong work, and knowing that you can make a difference, but that again, it's going to feel sometimes like it's 2 steps forward and like 100 steps back. So Tom, other thoughts from, I see you have a book.
Well, I was just going to throw something in. We did talk about this, and one of the questions about is this as we move to institutional levels, but this book, Equity Talk, the Equity Walk, is would be a great thing for you to take a look at. But here's one of my most favorite quotes ever from this book, and it's Obstacle 8, the incapacity to see institutional racism in familiar routines. Just down a little bit further, racism is often thought to be an act that is committed by individuals. However, the most pernicious form of racism is routinely created and reinforced through everyday practices. We got into a discussion on a number of things, and one of them on weeding people out instead of weeding people in, if that makes sense. And it's a really interesting and difficult thing. So anyways, I just, for what it's worth, I'd encourage this as one of those things. How about other comments? We have a few minutes.
Yeah, other thoughts. I just put some other book ideas. We heard in my group, we talked about some ideas. So Mike put in The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee as a great recent published book. Grading for Equity, that's a book that I'm doing in my educator learning community. And it is fascinating to see how, again, structures of racism, of bias have impacted the grading system, and how to deconstruct and reconstruct systems of fairness is really hard. And we talked a little bit in our group about it being consistent is not being fair, right? Like, oh, I just treat everyone the same. So that's how, right? Like, that's the right way. If I treat everyone the same, that's the best approach. When people are coming from different backgrounds with different resources, different experiences, that sameness isn't really fair.
And I am typing in the information for this book right now so that you have the title. Monica, thanks for asking about that. I was throwing it around too quickly. And I'm assumed that I got that written completely down. McNair, Benison, and Malcolm Pigot. Okay, I'm going to put up the last slide, and then we're going to talk a little bit about this afternoon. Share screen. So here are things we'd like you all to think about as you move into the spring semester and all the joy that brings. How we thought about engaging differences at the campus community level. Some of these questions about what might be key indicators and issues. And in our group, we did get down to that. How do we numbers, things that we can look at, and to continue personally engaging in a personal level in your community. And then during the closing retreat, both the integrated leader model and visionary leadership project should incorporate the results of your intercultural work. So I'll leave that up for now. And Carrie, closing comments?
Just gratitude for all the great work that you are doing and the courage to have these conversations within your institutions, within your organizations, with each other. Again, I know that this is work that can feel so critical for some and so overwhelming for others, and just feel like, oh my gosh, where do I even begin? And so knowing that we need to meet people where they are and to engage them in their journey, and that this is a great space, again, to really rely on each other and to just take advantage of the diversity that you have around, this table, so to speak, this virtual table, that you have such great experiences, insights, knowledge, and expertise that's represented in this team.
Hey, Lauren, Marianne, Diana, Anne, anything we need to put on the table?
I'm fine. Thanks to you and Carrie for leading this session. And let's take an hour. We'll come back to our leadership discussion this afternoon at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay, all set?
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good break.
Hey, Jessica, you can go ahead and turn the recording off.